Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Saturday, everybody. I'm happy to announce that China Update is now officially on Twitter, or X, as it is now called. YouTube will continue to be the main platform for all China Update videos, but China Update on Twitter will post the occasional video, post, retweet, or important announcements related to the channel. If you'd like to follow China Update on Twitter, it is at Tony China Update. There is also a link in the description below. Okay, it's Saturday, so today's video will be very foreign policy heavy, and we begin with Europe. The EU has formally launched its anti-subsidies probe into electric vehicles manufactured in China, beginning an investigation that could see provisional measures imposed in the coming months. According to a legal notice in the EU's official journal published this week, the one-year-long probe will focus on new battery-powered electric vehicles and alleged subsidies granted by the PRC. This is a story we have been following for some time. Beijing views EVs as a future technology it wishes to dominate. The highly subsidized sector has performed very well in the EU market and other markets, raising concerns, especially among the French, that China may be doing with EVs what it did to European steelmakers a decade ago. The notice expresses that there is enough evidence to establish that Chinese car makers have benefited from subsidies. Quote, those subsidies have allowed the subsidized imports to rapidly increase their market share in the EU to the detriment of the union industry. End quote. Adding that support includes, quote, various grants, provision of loans, export credits, and credit lines provided by state-owned banks or bonds underwritten by state-owned banks and other financial institutions at preferential terms, end quote, as well as, quote, dividend tax exemptions, import and export tax rebates, VAT exemptions and rebates, and government provision of goods. End quote. Yesterday, Friday, German car-making giant BMW AG confirmed that it had received a request for information from the European Union about its iX3 sport utility vehicle, which it exports from China as part of the bloc's probe. The questionnaires, which the company is filling out, have to be answered within a week. Quote, providing details such as investments in manufacturing capacities for EVs exported from China, end quote. BMW produces the electric iX3 SUV exclusively through BMW Brilliance Automotive Limited, its joint venture in China. This suggests that the probe will not only be looking into Chinese EV makers such as NIO and BYD, but also Western car makers too. Indeed, Tesla exports from China will likely also be a target of the probe. According to Schmidt Automotive Research, in the first 7 months of 2023, Tesla sold an estimated 93,700 made-in-China vehicles across Western Europe, 47% of its total deliveries. Obviously, Beijing is not happy about any of this. This week, the Ministry of Commerce said that the probe was launched, quote, solely based on assumption and lacking sufficient evidence, end quote. The same day, the China Association of Automotive Manufacturers said, quote, China's electric vehicle market is a competitive market, and it is by no means supported and protected by subsidies, end quote. Meanwhile, while we are on EU-China, UK-based Financial Times writes that Belgium's intelligence service has been monitoring Alibaba's main logistics hub in Europe for espionage. Quote, following suspicions, Beijing has been exploiting its growing economic presence in the West, end quote. Alibaba has been operating the hub in Liège, Europe's 5th largest cargo airport, since its €100 million investment there in 2018. Belgium's Justice Minister told the Financial Times this week that, quote, the early negotiations with Alibaba were from a former century. The times of naivete have changed, end quote. An unnamed source also told the outlet that Alibaba's relations to China's government meant that the logistics centers are expected to pass on information about local sentiment and report data about European trade and logistics to Beijing's authorities. Quote, the main concern is that this platform, alongside a couple of other logistical platforms that the Chinese have been proposing to European countries, is giving them a lot of insights into supply chains and into eventual vulnerabilities. Knowledge about important changes in consumption patterns and knowledge about the logistical chain is valuable for China as a country that tries to dominate the supply chain." End quote. In recent months, as part of a wider debate about China policy, European governments have been increasing scrutiny of the alleged security and economic risks posed by Chinese companies. Next up, we cross the Atlantic to discuss developments in US-China relations. If you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing are all a big help. Like I said, the channel is now over on Twitter for anyone who wants to follow there, and for anyone who wants to go the extra mile and help me keep China Update financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, yesterday, Friday, the US Commerce Department added 42 Chinese businesses to its export blacklist for alleged support of Russia's military efforts. The companies are accused of supplying importers connected to the Russian military sector with US origin integrated circuits, which could be used in precision guidance systems in its missile and drones. In a statement, the department's Industry and Security Undersecretary expressed, quote, "No matter how convoluted the trail may be or how many hands items are passing through, if US origin items are finding their way to Russia's military, we will work tirelessly to stop it." End quote. In September, the Commerce Department added 11 Chinese companies to the same trade blacklist for supplying components to make drones for Moscow. Meanwhile, also on Friday, the U.S. Justice Department announced that a former U.S. Army sergeant was arrested for seeking to provide classified information to China. Joseph Schmidt, 29, who served in the 109th Military Intelligence Battalion at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington State from 2015 through 2020, is charged with retaining national defense information and attempting to deliver it to China. The Justice Department said that in March 2020, Schmidt went to Hong Kong, where he provided Chinese intelligence with classified information, allegedly, quote, retaining a device that allows for access to secure military computer networks, and offered the device to Chinese authorities to assist them in efforts to gain access to such networks. End quote. Schmidt remained in Hong Kong until he returned to San Francisco in the United States yesterday, where he was arrested on arrival. And finally for today, outspoken billionaire investor Ray Dalio discussed his most recent views on US-China tensions at the Greenwich Economic Forum this week, warning that the two powers were moving to the brink of conflict. Dalio compared Washington's restrictions on advanced semiconductor exports to China to the petroleum ban imposed against the Empire of Japan prior to Pearl Harbor, expressing, quote, "The reason in World War II, war with Japan, you had the cutting off of the oil and then sanctioning them, taking their payments. Now there's a much similar situation. Chips like oil back then." End quote. US outlet Bloomberg, with whom Dalio was speaking, writes that the Bridgewater Associates founder has long nurtured relations with Chinese officials, expressed admiration for some of Beijing's economic policies, and built business for his firm in China. He has also been consistent in warning about the risk of conflict between the world's two largest economies. Quote, US-China relations are, in a number of areas, on the brink of red lines. So in other words, these are irreconcilable differences, and they are right on the brink. The breaking point is if the United States said, "We are in favor of the independence of Taiwan." That's the equivalent of declaration of war. And because of our political issues now, internally, you are going to be likely to push that because of the fact that many in the Congress and so on would say, "We'll defend Taiwan." Neither country wants to go to war. Everybody's afraid of what war would be like because it would be devastating, economically and politically. End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you everybody for watching. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you all back here for more China Update on Monday.